It took Henry Bowman about half an hour to get to altitude, circle around from the east, and set up the airplane for straight and level flight at 2,100 revolutions per minute. He was sitting at an angle in the single remaining front seat, for the dual rig on his back was a good 7 thick. The 172 had been sanitized, so that any plane flying nearby could tell next to nothing about it. Henry had spray-painted the 172 feet side windows gloss black from the inside after he and Alan had unloaded everything of value from the plane, and the entire interior smelled like enamel. Be just perfect to pass out from paint fumes, Henry said to himself. The end numbers on the tail were painted over as well. All interior surfaces had been wiped clean of prints, and Henry was flying with gloves on. These precautions were just in case the Skyhawk somehow crashed before reaching the ocean. Alan had asked about the emergency locator transmitter, designed to activate on high-G impacts, but Henry had explained that he'd removed the ELT's batteries before leaving Missouri. Henry engaged the autopilot, let go of everything, and made sure that the airplane stayed on course. Satisfied that the electronics were functioning as designed, Henry looked at the instruments one final time and grabbed the door handle. Now for the hard pan, he told himself. Skydiving schools that use Cessnas for jump planes invariably replace the factory door with a jump door, which is hinged at the top and can be easily opened in flight. Henry had jumped out of a 172 with a standard door once before, when a friend had flown him over a college football game in a rental plane, and he had jumped in at halftime. On that jump, however, the pilot had chopped the throttle, crossed the controls, and slipped the plane to the right to reduce the wind blast. Henry had none of those luxuries this time. No screwing around. One good shove, he told himself as he turned the handle and got his fingers between the door's trailing edge and the fuselage, then crouched on the floor next to the pilot's seat. Now, he said silently as he pushed off the pilot's seat with both feet, slammed his left shoulder into the door, and protected the handle of the pilot's chute on his belly band with his left arm. Henry got most of his torso out past the edge of the door as the 100-mile-per-hour wind tried to clamp him between the door and the fuselage. He sank down a few inches lower and gave a second violent thrust with his legs while pushing against door and fuselage with his shoulders and upper arms. Don't rack your balls on the main gear, Henry thought as his body exited the doorway in a 45-degree angle to the rear of the Skyhawk. His left thigh slammed painfully into the plane's right wheel pant, and then he was tumbling free. Henry Bowman bent at the waist and relaxed his arms and immediately started falling in a back-to-earth position. For a 5 count, he watched the Cessna proceed across the sky. Then he pulled in his left arm, flipped over, and went into the arch and spread position. He saw that he was west of Alan's van, so he pulled his arms into his sides and hunched his shoulders to put his body in a track towards the spot where he wanted to open. Alan Kane had intended to try to observe Henry's exit and opening, but he had started watching the Wilson Blair videotapes on the 9 DC-powered TV VCR Henry had brought. The portable color unit was running on batteries since Alan's truck had a military-standard 24-volt system, and now the Indiana firearms expert was utterly engrossed. He was almost through the second, more explosive tape Henry had made of Wilson Blair. This stuff is pure plutonium, Alan whispered to himself as he watched the screen. Then he heard the unmistakable sound of a parachute opening. It sounded like 1 second of violently fluttering nylon ending in a loud whop. Kane hit the stop button on the player and watched for the 90 seconds it took his friend to fly his gliding chute around the center of the valley and make a stand-up landing 50 feet away from the truck. Henry gathered up the parachute and walked over to where Alan stood at the back of the truck. He was favoring his left leg slightly from where he had slammed his thigh exiting the plane. There was a big smile on the younger man's face. "I see it opened," Alan said dryly. "Of course," Henry replied happily. "I packed it." "I watched your tapes," Alan said, changing the subject. "Almost through the second one. Good diversion. Did my best on short notice." "You know, Bowman," Alan Kane said with a smile, "when you first flew in here and told me what had happened, all I could think of was you spending the rest of your life in prison. But after seeing this," he said, indicating the portable television, "I think you got a real shot at dodging this thing altogether and showing the whole country what those sons of bitches have been up to. I think this tape here might make a real difference." He sucked at his teeth. "And they won't have a clue who did it," Henry added. "Right. Your scheme seems to have worked okay so far," Alan continued. "So I don't guess you were jerking off the whole time it took to fly up here. You got some plan, I suppose? Of what we should do now?" Henry's spirits rose at Alan Kane's choice of pronouns. "First I got to repack this chute so we can bury it in the Solotherm too," Henry said. Then when we get to town, I want to call Ray Johnson in Colorado. The guy moved back from Africa I met at your house that time? Right. I think the time has come to get some legal counsel on this, as backup if nothing else. Then I think we'll let ourselves get found by the feds. Sounds like a plan. No, I haven't heard from Blair. The man in Chicago almost shouted. Dwight Greenwell, 700 miles east, gritted his teeth as he listened to his regional director give him the bad news. Don't you realize that raising your voice to the boss is not the way to get ahead in government? He thought acidly. His Washington office was becoming more and more cramped, and Greenwell could feel his blood pressure hitting new levels. I'm sorry, sir, the man on the other end of the phone continued as if reading Greenwell's mind. It's just that we don't have much of anything on this end. Initial reports out of Missouri have been saying the crash out by Bowman's place was a mid-air collision, but we still don't have any word on where the third chopper went, and the guard is screaming bloody murder. On top of that, one of the local guys in the sheriff's department noticed that one of the two wrecked choppers on the scene was all shot up with machine gun fire from the inside. What? Greenwell sat bolt upright in his chair. We're still trying to put that part together, sir, but apparently the door gun malfunctioned and spun on its mount. It sprayed the inside of the helicopter, causing it to go out of control and hit the other one. And the third pilot decided to take a vacation in Mexico, Dwight Greenwell said with obvious disgust. Apparently Blair had an elaborate plan which included raids in Ohio, Indiana, and Missouri, all in a space of 3 days, the man in Chicago replied, ignored his superior's sarcasm. I've spoken with people in the Columbus and Indianapolis offices, and Blair had a total of 10 agents, counting himself, slated to raid the homes of a Mr. Grant Millett and a Mr. Alan Kane. Millett's place is in Columbus, and Kane's out in the country in southern Indiana. Both of these men are licensed Class II manufacturers and carry double D licenses as well. He took a breath and went on. Kane is presently in Idaho with Bowman. Millett is in South America. The raids were scheduled for the 7th and 8th, but apparently never happened. It appears that word of the raids leaked out to friends of both these men. There are between 10 and 20 people, with cameras camped out at both locations. Son of a whore! Greenwell spat. I despise it when those yellow chicken shit bastards do that. He calmed down and asked another question. Is that why the raids weren't carried out, because the element of surprise was lost? We don't know, sir. Well, what do the agents on the raid team say? Greenwell sometimes felt he was a kindergarten teacher. None of them can be located, sir, the man in Chicago answered miserably. We know, or we strongly believe, that Blair contacted at least 2 members of the Ohio raid team on the day that the raid was supposed to take place. We do not know what was said, but no one we've talked to heard any mention of the raid being canceled. Shortly thereafter, however, the 4 agents vanished. We have one report, the regional director went on, of 2 of the Ohio agents, Haywood Downing and Mary Bright, getting into a white van that matches the description of the one Wilson Blair was driving out 2 days before the driver was a white male, wearing dark clothing and sunglasses. Witness doesn't think he had a beard or mustache. We assume it's Blair. Well, where do you assume he is now? And where do you assume the agents from Indiana are? Greenwell demanded. I have no idea, the subordinate answered truthfully. Find all 3 of them, Greenwell said suddenly. 3? The man did not realize what his boss meant. Millett, Kane, and that other one, the director explained as if to an idiot child. Make damn sure they really are in South America and Montana or wherever. Get those OVL zeros up in the air and find the 2 that are in this country. Find those 2 men, debrief them, and get back to me. Yes, sir, the agent said, then realized he was speaking into a deadline. Dwight Greenwell sat in his office pondering the situation. Didn't want to say it out loud, he thought, but I'll bet Blair took a nice fat bribe from those 2 men. If I were asked how to get a raid canceled and have the agents all go on a long vacation, that's what I'd recommend. A large application of money. June 11th. Well, look who finally showed up, Alan Kane said with a smile as he squinted towards the sky. A dark blue twin-engine turboprop airplane was circling the valley. As it got closer to them, Henry could see the plane had red and white trim. Think you could hit it? He asked. With the Solothurn? Yeah, if he kept circling, and if I had one of those wheeled mounts like you got in Indiana. Never get enough elevation with the little bipod. Have to wait till he got a lot closer, but it looks like he's heading this way. I'd stick one right in his windscreen. The conversation Alan and Henry were having was purely theoretical. Henry's free market 20mm cannon was at the moment broken down, wiped clean, wrapped in hydrosorbent paper, packed in airtight plastic bags and buried in the national forest, with the location logged and encrypted inside his GPS receiver. Henry knew he might never be able to return to get the big gun his father had given him in 1967, but he believed in thinking positively. "He's checking out the truck." "Yeah. What now?" Alan asked, after the plane had finally left the area. "Let's shoot for a while, but then I think we should head into town. I hate making life easier for these assholes, but wouldn't you rather they found us in public instead of out here with no witnesses around?" "Good point," Alan agreed. June 12th. "Some folks been asking around about you two," the man behind the counter in the service station said as Alan and Henry came in to pay for their fuel. "I didn't tell them nothing, but they've been asking all over. Taxmen, I think they was. Not from around here." "Tax guys," Henry replied. "What would they want us for out here?" Alan Kane looked equally puzzled. "Don't know. Seems like they was more interested in knowing if you two was really out here and had anyone seen you. Didn't act like they had to get hold to you right away. You fellas in trouble?" the man asked dubiously. "None of my business if you're." Henry and Alan both shook their heads. "I'd like to know what they want," Kane said evenly. "If you see them again, tell them we're heading back to the Pastimaroy, then up towards Blue Dome." He handed the man a $100 bill, collected his change, and followed Henry back to the vehicle. "Let's hit a few more places, get something to eat maybe," Henry suggested in the cab of the truck. "Give them a chance to find us before we head out." The man at the filling station was the third person that morning to tell Alan and Henry about the federal agents. People in Idaho had no great love for government men, and that had been true even before Randy Weaver's wife and son had been murdered. "Sounds like a plan," Kane said as he started the engine. "Are you Alan Kane and Henry Bowman?" Alan and Henry looted at each other, then at the two men in suits standing at their table in the cafe. "Yes, we are," Kane said. "What's the trouble?" "We're with the Treasury Department," one of the men said as he produced some credentials. "You're ATF out of Boise," Henry said as he read the printing on the identification. "If somebody's reported machine gun fire, we're both special occupational taxpayers, and we've got copies of the registration papers for all the machine guns we brought with us." As Henry said the words, Alan Kane reached into his battered leather valise. Henry Bowman noted with interest that the two agents paid no attention to the action. Alan extracted a sheaf of ATF Form 3 seconds and laid them on the table. The two feds ignored the documents. Could we see some identification?" the second of the two ATF agents asked uncertainly. "What's this about?" Henry said as he slowly reached for his wallet. "We've got all our papers. Idaho doesn't have any law against firing full auto on state land. We haven't shot anything except a bunch of jacks, and those were with revolvers. But it wouldn't matter what we'd used. You federal guys wouldn't drive all the way to Salmon from Boise to look into a possible game violation or a noise complaint anyway. What's the story?" The agent took Henry's driver's license, looked at it, did the same with Kane's, and handed both to his partner. His expression was one of disappointment. "It's them," he said to the second man, shaking his head. "What?" Alan asked again, more forcefully this time. "What are you here for? What's the charge?" "We don't know the details," the second agent admitted. "We were told to find you. If you were up here, director seemed to act like you wouldn't be." He furrowed his brow, which went against the training he had been given to remain impassive. 3 days ago, 2 government helicopters crashed on your property, he explained, nodding to Henry. "Everyone on board was killed." "I don't understand," Henry said to the man. "What happened? Why did they send you to come find me? That's not the Treasury Department's Joe did they crash on my house," he demanded, as if suddenly realizing the implications of what the men were saying. "We don't know," the agent said truthfully. "We were sent to find you, since the men were from our department," he added lamely. Both agents had already learned from a dozen local sources that the big army truck had driven into the area 2 days before the time of the helicopter crash, and that the men in it were on vacation to shoot jackrabbits. "Well, I'd like to find out," Henry announced as he quickly slid out of the booth and walked briskly to the payphone near the cashier station. "When did you two get to this area?" the second agent asked Alan Kane. "Last week," Kane said. "Wednesday, I guess it was, we went through Arco in the late afternoon," he added, confirming what the feds had already found out from several sources. "Made camp that night in the Pastimaroy." Kane looked the two men in the eyes. "What's going on here, guys?" the Indiana weapons expert asked reasonably. "Why send you two all the way from Boise? Has Henry's place been burned to the ground? Are you here to find out what guns he brought, so you can tell your records guys in Washington which serial numbers to keep in your system and which to report as destroyed?" The agents were startled by this question, and it showed in their faces. They had not bothered to think how their presence might be interpreted by the two men. "We were told to find you," one of the agents said diffidently. Mr. Kane, the other agent said in a more friendly tone, the fact is that we don't know much more than you do about this deal. Like we said, we're out of Boise. We get a call to hot-foot it over here and make sure you two are all right. The man smiled, and I'm glad to see that you are. So who said we were in Mackey, or anywhere else in this state, for that matter? Kane demanded. Both of us are single, and I didn't give my ex any idea where I'd be. How'd you know where to look? Both agents' faces instantly became blank. We got our orders from Washington, the first one said finally. His tone implied that he expected Kane to be impressed by that bit of news. So now you're all done? Kane asked. You call up your boss on the East Coast and say, yep, they're there all right, and hang up the phone? What is going on? Kane repeated. The two agents were starting to plead ignorance again when Henry walked up. Talk to Skip Krause, Henry said to his friend as he slid back into the booth. He's the sheriff where I live. Feds aren't talking much, but they told him more than they told these guys. ATF borrowed 3 National Guard helicopters with pilots. 2 of them crashed in the woods on my property. They don't know where the third one is. He hasn't called in, and they have no idea where he flew off to. The two agents looked at each other. This was indeed more than they had been told. He hasn't crashed, though, Henry went on. There was no ELT signal like there was from the other 2. The emergency locator transmitter on the third aircraft had indeed been activated on impact. However, our ELTs did not work underwater. Sheriff Krause says that ATF doesn't want to talk about what they were doing there, but that it was some special project they were working on. Henry paused a moment, and his eyes narrowed. Kane thought he saw just the hint of a smile threatening to form, but it vanished. Then Henry dropped the bomb. The interesting part is that Krause says, according to the FAA, it looks like the ATF guys shot themselves down. What? Allen and one of the two agents said almost simultaneously. All 3 choppers had door gunners and M60s on swivel mounts. The 2 that crashed were blackened wrecks, but one had a ton of bullet holes in it going from the inside out. What are you talking about? The first agent demanded. One chopper was almost cut in half from .30 cal fire that came from the inside. First they figured it was a mid-air, and that's what set the gun off and spun it around. Made sense, because the gun was an M60, and those things run away all the time. But the FAA inspector told the sheriff that since the 2 wrecks were far apart, and each helicopter's rotor blades were still attached to the main shaft, it wasn't a mid-air. And on the one with the inside-out bullet holes, they only found 3 bodies at the crash site, and all the helos took off with 4 men in each. Deputies finally found the door gunner's body a quarter-mile away in the woods. Sheriff said it looked like he climbed out on the skid and hosed down the others inside, then bailed out. That's ridiculous, the second agent said indignantly. Alan Kane shook his head. No, it isn't, the Indianan said. In fact, it makes a lot of sense. Henry, what did the guy say about the second helicopter? Did it have a bunch of holes in it from the outside? He didn't mention anything about that either way. Just said that they were both burned-out wrecks. What I bet happened, Kane went on. Guy probably fired his first burst at the other chopper and shot it down. Then he jumped out on the skid and hosed the rest of the belt into his own helicopter and dove out before all the fuel caught fire. The two agents looked mightily offended at this and began to protest. That's absurd. You don't know anything. Makes sense, Alan, Henry went on, cutting off and ignoring the two feds who had now lost control of the discussion. It fits with what's happened before, out in California that time. Right, Kane said, that ATF guy in Los Angeles. One of the agents at the table spoke up. What are you talking? Best indicator of future behavior is past behavior, Henry Bowman said, once again acting as if the two government men were not there. The other agent put his hand on his partner's arm. I'll explain later, the first agent said to the second fed. Oh, you new to the department? Henry asked as he widened his eyes and looked at the ATF man. Happened a while back out in Southern California. An ATF guy in one of the local offices shot his partner in the head and then killed himself. Word the office tried to put out was it was an accident. When no one bought that line of crap, they came up with the claim that the guy was despondent because he hadn't gotten laid. A single guy in Southern California, Henry added, and he and Alan both broke out laughing. It's no wonder the other chopper pilot booked out of there and hasn't been heard from since. He probably wasn't ready to die for the glory of F Troop. Henry abruptly became serious and stared at the senior agent from Boise. I noticed that in all this time you haven't bothered to tell me what 3 armed helicopters loaded with ATF agents were doing over my property in the first place." There was a long pause before the agent spoke. "We're not at liberty to say." Henry and Alan exchanged a look. They both knew that there was no way the 2 feds from the local field office would be told anything about a raid over 1,000 miles away. What they were now hearing was blatant posturing and nothing more. "You want to pack up and head back?" Alan Kane asked his friend. Henry shook his head. "I still got plenty to shoot, and the jacks are unbelievable. Sheriff said he'd check my property every few days, shoot anyone that tried to loot the place. Let's stay till we run out of ammo. Maybe check out what's over in Montana." "You got anything more you want to ask us?" Kane asked the 2 feds. "If not, we're leaving. It's past the time we'd planned to head out." He and Henry both stood up. Kane picked up the check. The older fed opened his mouth and closed it again. He had been about to tell Henry and Alan not to go anywhere they couldn't be reached, but had realized he had no authority to make such a demand. The fed hadn't liked the way the conversation had gone, but there was nothing to do except report back to Washington. He and his partner turned without speaking and left the cafe. "Them 2 fellas from the ATF give you boys any trouble?" the woman behind the cash register asked. Henry grinned as he handed her a 20. The woman was only a few years older than he was, and at least 5 years younger than Alan Kane. She had dirty blonde hair and a little smile that told the 2 men that no matter how many unwanted come-ons she might receive every day, she still enjoyed male attention. "No more than you'd expect," Alan told her. "They've been bothering you?" "Can't say that. They've just been hanging around asking about you 2 and making everyone edgy. People around here, they don't think much of that bunch, after what happened to the Weaver family and all." "I hear you. 2 of their helicopters crashed on my property back in Missouri," Henry explained. "They wanted to tell me about it." "Well, hallelujah to that." Henry and Alan turned to see a weathered-looking man in faded blue jeans and a battered Stetson rising from a nearby table. "Didn't mean to listen in, but them 2 have been asking around about you for a couple days now. And I recognize the name. You're Alan Kane, aren't you? I've been reading your stuff for over 20 years now." He held out his hand and Kane shook it. "Folks thought Elmer Keith was a liar about shooting pistols at real long range, but you were telling everybody the same thing. I bought me a Super Blackhawk. 44 back in 71, tried it for myself. Saw you guys was telling the truth. Then this metal silhouette game come along, and the ones was calling you a liar seemed to shut up right quick. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Kane. You say some of them ATF men crashed their helicopters on your property?" he asked, looking at Henry. "That's what they said. I called the sheriff a few minutes ago. Both the choppers had M60 machine guns mounted in them. One of the wrecks was full of bullet holes going from the inside out, and they found the body of the guy who had been the door gunner a quarter-mile away in the woods. He said it looked like the door gunner shot the other chopper down, swiveled the gun around and dumped the rest of the belt into his own aircraft, then bailed out. They're looking into his history right now, from what the sheriff tells me," Henry said, making an educated guess. "See, was he on drugs or what?" Henry turned to his friend. "I got to make some more calls. Alan, sit down with this man and tell him about the 100 and 200 yard groups you've been getting with that new nose design." Henry turned towards the payphone. "They say why them 2 helicopters with door gunners was coming to your place?" the stranger asked. Henry stopped and turned back towards him, shrugging. "Those 2 guys wouldn't say, but I got a lot of guns, and I guess that's reason enough." "They find out what stuff it was that guy was on," the man said. "Maybe we could put it in the water up in Washington." "God damn it, I said I wanted a complete blackout on this fucking mess." ATF Director Dwight Greenwell screamed at his staff as he slammed down the phone. "That's the 4th call I've gotten in the last half hour from a newspaper, and they're all asking about Calvin Jones and what made him shoot down his own helicopter. Did he have a drug problem? Is this related to the murder-suicide in Los Angeles a few years ago? Jesus!" Then they want to know what the 2 choppers were doing there, and of course they want copies of the search warrant. And on top of that, they all seem to know about the 3rd one that's gone missing. "How do they know about that?" one of the staffers asked. "Hell, anyone could have talked about it, but this last guy wanted to know if Blair was on it. Said an agent gave him that tip. Where the fuck is the loyalty in this agency?" He shook his head and looked around at the others in the office. "I want you people to get on the phones to every one of our field offices. Find Blair. Call every goddamn airport where a National Guard helicopter might refuel. That son of a bitch is going to have some answers for me." He looked each of his subordinates in the eye. "I don't need to tell you that none of you is to say word one to the press about any of this." Greenwell's staff was not about to disobey this last order, but the damage had been done. 9 well-placed phone calls from. A cafe in Idaho had started a line of inquiry that was not going to go away. "You had a ZX-11 and it got stolen?" the young man asked Henry, as the two men stood looking at the 1981 Kawasaki, which Henry had spent 20 minutes going over. The ZX-11 was the fastest motorcycle Kawasaki had ever made. It had been tested by several magazines at over 170 miles per hour in utterly stock condition. "Right outside my motel room in Idaho Falls. Had my gear in the room with me, but the bike's gone for good, I'm afraid. Had a padlock on the brake rotors, so I guess it got lifted into a pickup. Best road bike I ever had," Henry said wistfully. He shrugged. "Got to finish my trip and the insurance won't pay off for a couple months at the least." "That sucks." "Yeah." Henry stared at the 30-ish man whose classified ad he had spotted in the local paper. "Look, you're asking absolute top dollar for a bike this old. But you've always garaged it, the oil's clean, the electrics all work, the engine sounds good, the tires aren't bald, and ZLs don't break. I know, I had one before I got my 11. I got to buy something soon because I got to be moving, and I'm over a barrel. You got saddlebags on it, and that helps too. I'll pay your price in cash, but you got to do one thing for me." "What's that?" the seller asked. "I can't be riding all the way back to Pennsylvania with no plates, and I'd rather not trust that long a trip to one of those pieces of paper that says, 'License applied for.' Insurance is no problem, I'm insured on anything, but riding with no plate is asking for trouble. Call your agent and cancel your coverage right now if you want, but leave the plate on. The bike will still be in your name until I get home and mail the title off to the DMV anyway." The young man thought a moment and then nodded. "Yeah, okay," he said, smiling. "That sounds fair." Henry pulled out his money clip and began peeling off hundreds. It was almost 10 p.m. when Henry Bowman pulled into the long-term parking lot at the Salt Lake City airport. Henry lifted the Kawasaki onto its center stand and bent over to check the oil level through the sight glass. "Doesn't look like it used any." He smiled. Motorcycles are the perfect way to travel anonymously, Henry told himself. Pick one with no trick paint and wear a full-face helmet, and you too never get a positive ID on the bike or the rider. He pocketed the key, unstowed his bags, and began the long walk to the United Express ticket counter. June 13th. "You made it a little earlier than I thought," Ray Johnson said into the phone. He did not use any names. "But that's good. I can pick you up in about 20 minutes. "Ah." Ray hesitated, about to say more, then decided against it. Got a funny feeling about this, he thought silently, remembering the time when the roles had been reversed and he had been the one calling from an airport. "I'll see you then," he finished, knowing the questions he had could wait until he and Henry were face to face in private. "So what's going on?" He looks a little tired, but otherwise in good shape, Ray decided. Henry smiled. "Are you still a lawyer, Ray?" he asked as he turned in the passenger seat of Ray's pickup so that he could face his friend. "You still belong to the New York bar?" "I told you that on the phone. It was only $20 a year to stay a member while I was in Africa. I figured that was a screaming bargain compared to taking it all over again if I ended up wanting to practice law when I got back to the United States. You want to tell me why that's important?" "I want to retain you." He reached in his shirt pocket and withdrew a thin sheaf of bills. "Here, that's $1,000. Ray waved the money away. "Lawyer can be on retainer without actually getting any cash up front. He just has to be convinced the client's good for it." He yawned quickly, then closed his mouth. "Okay, I'm working for you now. Anything you say is protected by the attorney-client privilege. What's the scoop? You in trouble?" At this question, Henry Bowman started laughing, and Ray felt the hair on his back stand up. He turned to look at his younger friend. "Watch where you're going, Ray," Henry said gently. "Be embarrassing to drive into the Roaring Fork River sober and in broad daylight. To answer your question, to the best of my knowledge, no, I am not in trouble. Not yet, at least. But that could change any time." "This sounds like it might be interesting," Ray said as he pulled off the road onto the gravel shoulder. "And maybe I'd better concentrate. How to start?" he wondered as he turned to face his friend. What do you anticipate that you might be charged with?" Ray asked. "Lawyers need to know what the charges are and what evidence the prosecution has. They don't need to have the client confess his guilt or innocence. Although I never met one yet that didn't want to know whether he needed to or not," he added mentally. "You remember my friend Alan Kane?" Henry asked. "Sure. Guy from Indiana. Met him at your place that time." "Right. ATF tapped his phone this past spring. They have recordings of us planning a trip out to Idaho to shoot jackrabbits. Here's what ATF knows and/or suspects." Henry took a deep breath and started in, speaking with the minimal inflection of a newscaster. On the morning of June 5th, Alan Kane was seen leaving his house in southern Indiana in his Army deuce and a half. That afternoon, he was seen driving onto Henry Bowman's property in Missouri. On June 7th, 6 ATF agents, including Regional Director Wilson Blair, left Indianapolis to execute a search warrant on Alan Kane's property. None of the 6 agents or the white van they were in has been seen since. However, Wilson Blair is believed to have contacted 1 or more agents in the Columbus, Ohio ATF office the following day. 4 agents from that office, who were under Blair's supervision and planning to execute a second raid on an NFA dealer in Columbus on June 8th, have gone missing as well. 2, and possibly all 4 of the missing agents in the second group were last seen in Columbus, getting into a white van similar to the one Blair and the other 5 agents from Indianapolis were last seen driving. Witnesses said the driver was a white man whose physical appearance and manner of dress is consistent with Wilson Blair's. The raid, which was to be made on the home of an NFA dealer who is currently in South America, was supposed to be a secret. However, a number of NFA and Title I dealers were camped out at the site of the raid the day after it was to have taken place, and they had apparently been there for over 24 hours. It is clear that they were tipped off. The following morning, June 9th, Blair or someone claiming to be him phoned the ATF office in Missouri to talk to an agent who was going on a third raid with him, this one scheduled for that afternoon. The raid was on Henry Bowman's property in Missouri, and because of the terrain, the agents had arranged to be transported there in 3 National Guard helicopters borrowed for the occasion. 2 of the helicopters crashed in the woods on Bowman's property before reaching his house. The third is missing. Examination of the wrecks revealed that 1 helicopter was riddled with machine gun fire which came from inside the aircraft. The body of the door gunner was found a quarter-mile away in the woods. One theory gaining merit is that the door gunner shot down the other helicopter, swung the gun around, and shot up his own aircraft, then either committed suicide by jumping out the door or was blown out of it when leaking fuel in the plummeting craft ignited. No one has as yet come up with a satisfactory explanation for the third helicopter and the men in it, all of which remain missing. Upon learning of the crashes and hearing the FAA's preliminary evaluation of the evidence at the crash sites, the ATF director in D.C. called the ATF regional office in Boise. He gave instructions to the agents there to look for Kane and Bowman in Idaho. The director wanted to determine if the 2 men were indeed in that state. The agents were finally able to locate Kane and Bowman eating breakfast in a cafe in Salmon, Idaho on June 12th. In the 2 days prior to that encounter, however, the ATF agents had spoken with numerous people in several towns who had seen the big green army truck and had talked to the 2 men who had come to Idaho to shoot running jackrabbits with revolvers. Several people interviewed placed both Kane and Bowman in a remote section of the Pomeroy Valley on June 10th. One of these witnesses was a cattle rancher living at the base of Bora Peak who recalls the 2 men stopping at his cabin on their way out of the valley that day. He accurately described Kane's injured left hand and the flecks of brown in Bowman's right eye. He said Kane drank coffee with him, while Bowman played with his dogs, a pair of Australian shepherds. Grant Millett, the owner of the property in Columbus, Ohio, which was scheduled to be raided on June 8th, was located in South America, where he had been for more than 2 weeks. Thus, none of the 3 NFA dealers scheduled to be raided appear to have been actively involved in the disappearance of the 10 agents in Indiana and Ohio, or the deaths or disappearances of the 12 agents and guardsmen in Missouri. At the present time, efforts are being focused on investigating other NFA dealers known to or friends of Kane, Bowman, or Millett. No promising leads have been discovered as yet. Ray waited for Henry to go on, then realized his friend had finished. He's trying for a poker face, but I can see something in his eyes, Ray thought. Do you expect to be charged with a crime? Ray asked finally. Henry shrugged. I didn't expect to have 3 guard choppers with door gunners attack my place, but it looks like it happened. Yeah, no shit, Ray thought. I get the distinct impression you know more about what happened than anyone in the ATF, or the FAA for that matter. He's thinking how to answer that one, or whether to say anything at all. Ray waited him out. What have you gotten yourself into, Henry Bowman, Ray wondered. The dangerous game hunter had not felt so much alive since before his return to the States. Let's just say, Henry said deliberately, that none of the events which I have just described baffle me. When he heard those words, Ray Johnson felt something click inside. I'm in. What? I'm in. Whatever part you had in what you just told me about, you're not finished. You're planning something on top of it, aren't you? Got him there, Ray thought, when he saw Henry's reaction. I want to be part of it, Ray said baldly, as an accomplice, not legal counsel. He turned the key in the ignition and restarted the car. Damn, I feel 20 years younger, Ray thought happily. Ray, I don't think... Hey, wait till we get to the house, Ray said, cutting Henry off in mid-sentence, as he pulled back out onto the road. We're done dancing around, Ray said as he put down his coffee and leaned forward in his chair. There were 22 feds you mentioned when we were in the car driving up here. 12 dead and 10 missing. I assume you killed some of them? Not some, Henry explained, shaking his head. All 22. Damn, Ray said. This is worse than when you got caught in that buffalo stampede. Ray sat silently, thinking about everything Henry had told him and about the videotape he had seen. Feds will be looking for men that don't exist, he thought. Even if they find the chopper in the quarry, it doesn't change anything. Same theory would still fit perfectly. And if they analyze the wrecks and find traces of thermite, like Henry's afraid they'll do, so what? That just makes their whole mission even more bizarre. He's home free. Ray squinted his eyes shut and rubbed his temples. But he's got that whole list and all that other data from Blair's files. Ray opened his eyes and stared at his friend as he delivered his assessment. It's good, but it's not good enough, he said finally. I can't think of any more safeguards or cutouts, Henry said, shrugging helplessly. Either it'll work or it won't. I can't go back and redo any of the things I set up, so no use playing coulda, shoulda, woulda. I'm sure Alan won't let me down on the alibi end of things. That's not what I meant, Ray corrected. Your plan's a winner, far as it goes, he said, nodding. You've eliminated the evidence and made it look like you were out in Idaho when it happened. You got the ringleader on tape, admitting that ATF was going to plant stuff and lie so they could arrest the three of you, and he stopped it. That call to action you have him giving was a damn stroke of genius. You're dead right that a few copies of that tape in the right places, we'll drive the whole department batshit and throw them off any theory that it might have been you that killed those guys in the helicopters. You're basically home free, the older man said. But it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't solve the problem. Doesn't solve the problem? Not just staying out of prison, but not being arrested in the first place. What do you call that? Henry said immediately. He doesn't see it, Ray thought. At least not yet. I wonder if he'll think I've lost my mind. It doesn't solve the problem of the ATF and all these other government assholes. There'll be an investigation, and then it will go back to the same thing. That's the first thing I thought of when you told me what happened. Ray sat back in his chair and stared out the big window that overlooked Aspen Mountain. Henry, when I left your house back in '94, one didn't quite believe all the things you and your friend Alan had told me. I didn't think you were making anything up, but I figured there was more to the story than you knew. So when I got back here, I took some of my own money and I made my own inquiries, and I found out things were a lot worse. I found out that what you told me was just the tip of the iceberg. There were a lot of things I learned that bothered me, but the one that really did it was what I found out in early '95. The papers then were full of articles about how the FBI was being investigated for shooting Randy Weaver's son in the back and blowing his wife's brains out while she was holding the baby she was nursing. I got transcripts of everything, and as you said, it was all stonewall and whitewash, and our brave agents acted heroically under tremendous adversity. That didn't really surprise me, although I admit I had expected better. The last straw was what I discovered next. At the same time, they were saying Horiuchi maybe shouldn't have murdered Vicky Weaver, and they would keep much closer control on their rules of engagement. The FBI had just ordered almost 2,000 suppressed. 308 sniper rifles with night vision scopes. Henry, Ray said, leaning forward as he spoke, we get that kind of information out. Along with that tape you made of Wilson Blair, we can stop these bastards. Put them all on the run in fear for their lives, and... Those rifles, Henry broke in. Were they made by Brown Precision with AWC suppressors and stand image tubes? Ray's eyes grew wide. How did he know? Yes, he said. Caught off guard. How? Everyone knew. Hell, those three companies were months behind in the last half of '94 and the first half of '95. None of us with NFA licenses could get anything out of them for a long time. It was like trying to get semi-auto pistols out of Smith & Wesson at the end of the Vietnam War. Yeah, well, I called those places because I wanted to find out why the FBI thought it needed 2,000 suppressed, night-capable sniper rifles. You know what one of them said? Let me guess. When you talked to the guys at AWC and Stano, they either said it was confidential or gave you a bunch of crap about the FBI meeting the terrorist threat and used those morons who bombed the World Trade Center as an example. They got the order long before the Oklahoma City bombing, or they'd have used that one as an excuse too. If you talked to anyone at Brown Precision, they probably half-joked that it was so the FBI could kill civilian members of the gun culture like me or Alan with less risk of dying in the process, and they probably sounded half apologetic that they were doing business with the goddamned feds in the first place, because Chet Brown is an old-time prairie dog hunter and bench rest shooter, but the company needed the business, and they figured it wouldn't hurt to get on the government's good side. Ray Johnson's mouth hung open. "How did you know?" he asked, dumbfounded. Henry shrugged. "Common knowledge. While you were doing research, did you check out the Bill Fleming case? Happened about the same time? Machine gun manufacturer in Oklahoma. No relation to my friend Tom the lawyer. Bill used to do business with a bunch of police departments, developed a bunch of HK variations the factory had said were impossible, like an MP5 and 45 auto, and ended up going to prison?" "Yes," Ray said with great animation. "That was another one I was going to tell you I found out about. He got 3 years in prison for a $1,200 tax dispute, $200 taxes on 6 guns. I looked into it, and he was exempt from the tax because the transaction was with the police department. Henry, when people find out what our government's doing, they—" "Everybody knew that," Henry cut in. "Did you find out the real reason Bill's in prison?" "What do you mean?" "Bill acted as an expert witness a few years earlier, in a case the ATF was trying to make against some guy, involving suppressors. He made the jury see the feds didn't have a case. If that was all, he might have been okay, but Bill rubbed their noses in it, made them look like idiots in court. They never forgave him for that. He knew he'd fucked up. And for a while, his ads had a picture of him and his family dressed up like feds on a raid, ready to break in the back door of some cheap tract house. They were all holding machine guns, with Bill toting a GE minigun, which everyone thought was hilarious. He was trying to suck up to the feds, but it was too late, and they got him. Jerry Drayson over in Illinois, feds bought an AR-15 barrel from him. Not a gun, just the barrel. It was one of those short military ones, and Jerry had a long flash hider on the muzzle, welded in place to make sure the length was over 16. Feds put the thing in a vise, stuck a pipe wrench on the flash hider to try to bust it off. It turned in the jaws, so they threw the barrel on a milling machine, milled a couple flats on it to keep it from turning, went back to the vise with their 4-foot Stilson, and snapped the welds. Hit Jerry with a couple hundred counts of selling short-barreled rifles, because that's how many barrels he had in stock, then threw on a couple hundred more counts of conspiracy to violate federal tax laws, because that's what the NFA is officially, a tax measure. I thought you said it was just his barrel, and there was no gun with it. There wasn't, but Jerry did have AR-15s for sale, so that was good enough. After spending $500,000 fighting it, he finally pled to a few of the counts, and they let him off with a $100,000 fine. Since he's a felon, he can never own or sell guns again. Only reason he got off that easy is that while all this was going on, he got in a car accident when a tire came through his windshield. It almost killed him, and he's disabled now with brain damage. "How about Aaron Lippman?" Henry asked. "You check on him? Jewish guy in his late 50s, NFA dealer who sold guns to police departments and made self-defense videos, goes to Florida with his girlfriend, and when he gets back to Pennsylvania, he finds this guy who was working for him, has sold a bunch of his inventory and made off with the money. Aaron has him arrested, and to save his ass, the guy tells the cops he'll cut a deal with the feds. Says Aaron's making suppressors and machine guns without a Class 2 manufacturer's license, and shows him a bunch of steel tubing lying around the shop in a junky old semi-auto ML1 Mac that he says is now full auto. Feds seized the tubing in the Mac, and every other gun in his inventory hit him with 87 counts of illegal manufacture and conspiracy to violate federal firearms laws, or tax laws, I forget which. Prosecutor saw it was a bullshit case and kicked it, but the feds kept all Aaron's guns, which were worth about 60 grand. The dumb bastard sued to get them back, so the feds had to give it all they had to keep from looking like idiots. And guilty on 87 counts. He's in the federal slam right now. Henry cocked his head to one side. Dave Green at Springfield Armory and Jack Burge over in Ohio. You know about that one? No, Ray said, his anger mounting. Henry scowled. There was another guy in there too. I forget his name because I never met him. Anyway, all 3 of them were NFA dealers like me. Dave was supposed to transfer 20 M60 machine guns to one of the others. I think it was the 3rd guy. But Dave's secretary gets the message wrong and fills out the forms transferring them to Jack Burge instead. Dave realizes the error when the transfers come back approved and he sees the wrong name on them. So he calls Jack, explains the fuck up, and Jack says he'll transfer them to the 3rd guy, where they should have gone in the first place. Jack grabs a stack of transfer forms, fills them out, signs them, and sends them off to Washington. Dave calls the 3rd guy, explains his mistake, tells him the delay will only be a few weeks, and he'll ship the 20 guns as soon as Jack gets the papers back approved. Guy says that's fine. Papers clear in 3 weeks. Jack mails them to the guy, and then Dave ships the guy his guns. So what's the problem? Problem is the feds found out. from somebody who heard about it and ratted out those three to save his own butt. Ratted them out for what? Ray demanded. What was the crime? Jack Burge was hit with 20 counts of filling out transfer forms to transfer NFA weapons which were not in his possession. All three men were charged with 20 counts of conspiring to violate federal firearms laws since they discussed the screw-up on the phone. In point of fact, I don't think any one of them thought Dave should ship 900 pounds of stuff worth $40,000 to the wrong guy so that he could then ship it to the right one. Anyway, all three of them spent a pile of money, saw they were fucked, and pleaded to a few counts with six-figure fines. None of them have licenses anymore. You could talk for weeks without running out of examples. Guy named Lampla in Pennsylvania, he was a guy who organized gun shows. 15 feds broke into his house, tore the shit out of the place, and left. On the way out, walking across the yard, a lady fed stomped the wife's kitten to death in front of her and other witnesses. Stomped her cat to death, Ray almost shouted. Yeah, laughed at her while she did it and told Lamplo and his wife to count themselves lucky. Louis Katona, you find out about him? He had a machine gun collection, taxes all paid, the whole deal. Police chief who signed his paperwork got in a jam about child molestation, so he hands him Louis. Says he never signed any of the forms, his secretary did it for him, so they're not legit. Feds bust into Katona's house, jack his pregnant wife up against the wall, and she miscarries. He eventually got his guns back, but it cost him $100,000 or so, in addition to the miscarriage. There are literally thousands more cases. I'm just giving you the ones I knew personally. Henry quit talking and Ray stared at him. Looks like he's about to cry, Ray thought in surprise. He kept his peace and waited for his friend to speak. Worst one of all, at least in my opinion, Henry said finally, was Chris Lee. Chris was an NFA dealer and manufacturer, lived up north of Allen in Indiana. Never saw a gun he couldn't fix. Got swamped during all the ceasefires at Knob Creek, because he'd work on everybody's stuff for free. Just for the challenge, I guess, Henry added as an afterthought. One year at Knob, this big fat guy from Michigan sees Chris on the firing line and says, Hey Chris, where can I find Dan Hunter? I need to talk to him. Chris says at the other end of the line or whatever, and the fat guy goes off and finds Hunter. Turns out what the fat guy wants to talk to Hunter about is getting some paper for guns he's got. That means registration paperwork that somebody typed up and got approved before May 19th, 1986, when the feds slammed the door because of that stupid New Jersey cocksucker Hughes. We're talking about paperwork that was typed up and approved, without there ever having been a gun to go with it. Paperwork that manufacturers planned to use after the cutoff, so they could do some business while they looked for other employment, since the law change abolished their livelihood. Now Dan Hunter was a fucking squirrel, and he always seemed to have a virtually limitless supply of pre-May 19th approved paper. I guess those two things together should have been a tip-off, but back then the guys he was selling it to weren't thinking along those lines. So the fat guy buys the paper for some gun or other that he's built up, and Dan Hunter rats him out. Dan Hunter rats him out because ratting guys out is what Dan Hunter does for a living. You see, Dan Hunter is the highest paid informant in the history of the whole fucking ATF, and that is why Dan Hunter always has a supply of pre-May 19th paper. The feds make it up for him whenever he wants, with all the proper date stamps and official signatures on it. The fat guy from Michigan shits when the feds come down on him, and he starts blubbering that he'll rat anyone out that they want if they'll please give him immunity. Who do they want? Chris Lee. Now most people might not think that Chris Lee had committed a crime, but most people don't work for the ATF. Chris Lee was charged with our old friend conspiracy, the all-purpose charge. You see, he told the fat guy at Knob Creek where to find Dan Hunter when the fat guy asked him. But that wouldn't, Ray broke in, but Henry cut him off. Don't argue with me, Ray. I said the same thing until I got a copy of the indictment. I read it. He's furious, Ray thought as he watched Henry get himself back under control. Ray's own outrage was continuing to mount. So they break into his place with a dozen agents. One guy shoves his gun in Chris's mouth and they cut open his safes and take maybe $200,000 worth of guns. They go to one prosecutor after another and none of them would touch it, but finally they get some cunt from Detroit who thinks that no one but the cops should have guns, and she says okay. What everybody hoped would happen, Chris included, was that the feds would offer to let him plead to an infraction and pay a big fine, like $250,000 or so. No soap. The feds were bound and determined to get at least one felony count. You see, Chris Lee is the most serious shooting enthusiast on the entire planet, bar none, and everyone, feds included, knows it. He makes you, me, Alan, and Tom put together look like we're bored with shooting. He fires upwards of 500,000 rounds a year, and there is no way Chris Lee will ever rat out or set up another gun guy, and everyone knows that too. So it is a matter of pride for the feds to make it so that Chris Lee can never own or shoot another gun in his life. Chris hires Bob Sanders, the former head of the Chicago ATF office. Sanders quit ATF in 1982 when he got proof his agents were planting evidence and committing perjury against guys like us, and his bosses in Washington told him to shut up about it. He quit and went into private practice doing nothing but defending gun guys on this kind of stuff. Chris also hires Jim Jeffries, former prosecutor who nailed Agnew in the 70s, and Chris hires Stephen Halbrook, the country's top legal scholar on the Second Amendment. These three guys are the best there is, and they are not cheap, especially for a guy who tries to make his living selling something the government banned the manufacture of in 1986. The feds hit back by getting indictments in several other districts, so he has to fight those too. They hit him with an IRS audit the next day. They drag their feet on his transfers. His lawyers file suit for harassment, get documentation of a bunch of illegal actions by all the agents involved, show that the warrant's a joke, and get a court order stating that any agent discussing the case is committing a felony as he is divulging confidential tax information. Then Waco happens, and the public is outraged, and we start thinking Chris's case will get dismissed. Nope, feds have unlimited money and they're going to bankrupt him and make him plead to a felony. Henry sat back in his chair. His eyes were focused far off in the distance. Is that what happened? Ray asked finally. I don't know, Henry answered without shifting his gaze. I'm ashamed to say that. Last I heard it was. Still getting delayed, with the feds hoping he'd go bust before they had to go to trial, because they were afraid they'd lose. But that was a while ago. See, in '95 I found out that there were over 3,000 people in federal prison for gun paperwork violations, and I figured that sooner or later I would be next. I quit going to Knob Creek, and I quit going to gun shows, and I quit selling guns, and I damn near quit buying them too. Other than the people in Missouri, I lost contact with every gun guy I used to see except Alan Kane. Mainly, I would just shoot on my own place. Figured the feds would leave me alone that way. Henry drew a deep breath. It's the only thing I've ever done in my life for which I am truly ashamed. He laughed mirthlessly. And you can see how well that plan worked. That's just what I've been wanting to tell you, Ray said, finally seeing an outlet for the intense feelings that had been building up within him. The time for passive resistance and legal redress is past, and the time to take up arms has come. We can't let these feds keep getting away with this kind of outrage. With what you've done and that tape you made, we can reverse this. If you're willing to continue the fight, I'll sign on with you. If you fade into the background now, it'll just keep happening. Two of us take on one whole branch of the government, Henry said with a soft chuckle. That's just a little too lopsided for me, Ray. I'm not that eager to die. I'm not talking about just the two of us, Henry. There are at least 5 or 6 million serious Bill of Rights advocates in this country who understand the importance of the Second Amendment. There are at most, 10 or 12,000 people in the government trying to dismantle the Bill of Rights. That's a 500 to L advantage, and you, one person, have managed to kill 22 of those enemies. There'll be no contest. I got thrown into that, Henry said quickly. I had to do something. No one else is in that position. He doesn't see it, Ray thought. I'll try a different tack. We're at a crossroads here, Henry, and we've got history to guide us, to tell us which road to take. Think of how the last 50 years would have been different if the Jews in Germany had chosen the other road. There were German Jews who fought in France in World War I, and you know some of them brought home guns. 20 years later, when the SS guys came for them, they had a choice, and the choice they made was to roll over and get ready to die. What would have happened if after Kristallnacht they had swept up their broken glass, dragged out their 20-year-old war souvenirs, and said, okay, those guys didn't wear masks. We know exactly who they were. They're dead meat, and blasted the stormtroopers the next time they saw them alone? What if every time there was a raid, a couple of those fresh-faced, blonde 20-year-olds got carried off to the morgue, and the others got marked? For later execution? I can't argue with you there. I've said the same thing many times. Right. And what about the Ku Klux Klan here in America? They had serious power for 60 or 70 years. What if every time 5 or 6 guys in white sheets came to toss a firebomb in a black church, or burn a cross on a guy's lawn, somebody with a $10 .22 shot one of them in the leg to keep him from running away, and then held a straight razor against his balls and asked the man nicely for the names and addresses of his friends, and then popped each one of them in the back over the next few weeks while they were on their way to church or the drugstore? Klan wouldn't have lasted 70 minutes, let alone 70 years. Look, I know that with the Jews there's been 100 or so generations of knuckling under, and Jews have always succeeded mentally, not physically. Say Sandy Koufax and Mark Spitz, and you've about exhausted the list of the world's Jewish athletes. Blacks had a history of subservience too. Jim Crow laws in many places kept them from having guns, and where it was legal, they didn't have any money to buy anything but junk single shots. But shit, Henry, the people at the crossroads now don't have any of those problems. Ray looked at his friend, who had obviously been thinking about what he had been saying. I've said many of the same things to various other people over the last 20 or 30 years, Henry admitted. So you agree that this problem is not going to go away, and it is only going to get worse until it turns into a real shooting war? Ray asked. I think that's already been proven, but how are you proposing we make this call to arms, Ray? Organizing against the government, we'd get nailed in a New York second. Someone will always sell you out to save his own ass. We don't organize. Who are you organized with in the last week? Nobody. You can't get sold out if no one knows what you're doing. We use the internet and electronic bulletin boards. We get the message out about who the targets are and how easy it is to kill them and get away with it when working alone. We don't have to get much participation, Henry. Hell, take that figure of 5 million I used before, which I think may be low. If only 1 out of every 5,000 thinks it's a good plan and pops one Fed, don't you think 1,000 dead ATF agents would get these guys to revise their priorities? Let's see if I've got your plan straight here. You want to log on to the internet or a bunch of bulletin boards, or both, anonymously of course. Then you want to issue an immediate release to all ATF and government offices. Henry thought a moment, then went on. It'll say something like, ATF, you've had your fun and up till now your only risk has been a letter in your file or a few days of paid suspension. That's over. Thousands of decent American citizens are in prison or dead because they didn't fill out a line on one of your stupid forms, or a piece of wood or metal was longer or shorter than you said it should be, or some other stupid thing. No more. The party's over. Henry thought a moment. Won't do much good to kill the janitors in the federal buildings, so let's put a limit on our ultimatum, say GS7. He went back to his announcer's voice. From now on, any ATF employee with a government service classification of GS7 or higher is a party to the treason the ATF has committed and is now subject to execution, as are all ATF informants, no exceptions. Second, any judge who upholds any gun law shall also be guilty of treason and subject to execution, no exceptions. From now on, guns will be treated the same as books. Third, since elected officials and law enforcement entities have a duty to defend the Constitution, any elected official or police agent who supports or enforces any measure, past or present, which violates the Second Amendment shall be subject to execution. Private citizens may freely advocate any policies or ideas that they want, as per the First Amendment. Not bad, actually, Ray thought, but Henry was talking again. Then I suppose you'd want to post a list on the internet of all the ATF agents and their home addresses. Informants too, and maybe throw in the national politicians who voted for anti-gun bills, so the people wouldn't have to track down all that info themselves. And then a few tips about tactics and acting alone and not talking to anyone, and how you should refuse to make any statements at all to cops. That about what you had in mind? Henry asked his friend. Oh, I almost forgot. I guess you'd want to give all these thugs an alternative to being executed, so you'd throw in a graceful way out, like public notice in the Wall Street Journal classifieds of resignation from government service or from law enforcement duties shall secure absolution from past crimes. Any return to government service shall reinstate the death sentence. Would that do it, Ray? Henry asked with raised eyebrows and a faint smile. Shall we let them keep their pensions? You don't think that plan would work? Ray asked. His face was entirely devoid of expression. Henry's face became equally serious, and Ray watched him inhale deeply before answering. No, I don't think it would work. Let's leave out the fact that no system operator in his right mind would run that kind of message on his bulletin board because he'd be soliciting murder. Assuming you could get your message out exactly the way you wanted it, your revolt would still never happen, and here's why. You might get a few guys from the fringes of society. A fellow like Randy Weaver might go for your IDEA. You might get a Tim McVeigh or two, and out-of-work guys who spend all their time talking about forming militias might buy in, but they'd blab about anything they were even thinking of doing, and they'd get caught before they accomplished a thing. For your plan to really work, you need intelligent, thoughtful, motivated people to embrace it. You need leaders, not losers. Henry took a breath and shook his head slowly, thinking, that's not going to happen for two reasons. First, you are asking people to do the hardest thing in the world, and that's to be completely alone with no support. You're asking people to go into enemy territory alone, like a guy parachuting into France before the Normandy invasion. Except your soldier won't have anyone on his side who knows what he's up to and who might be able to help him. Your soldier can't look forward to getting out of enemy territory when his mission is accomplished. Your soldier can't talk to his buddies about how scared he was and how glad he is to be safe. Your soldier has no commanding officer. Your soldier is winging it. I can't think of a single person I know who'd sign on to that deal on the basis of an anonymous message over the internet. Guess he's right, Ray thought, and a feeling of helpless rage came over him. There's another problem, Henry said, and it's even more serious than the first one. You are expecting your volunteers to go out and kill people who are just like them. You aren't saying, see that guy over there by the barbed wire? The one wearing a strange uniform, talking in a language you don't understand, and laughing while his German shepherd tears the baby out of that naked woman's belly? Go blast him. That would be easy. That would be like sitting in your living room in Bozeman, Montana, seeing some Italian UN troops in blue berets smashing the door across the street. Take about 3 seconds to decide what to do there. Boom. Bunch of dead Italians. 94 crime bill where the president had that provision in it to hire a bunch of Hong Kong municipal police because they'd be good at seizing guns. I had to laugh. Talk about hazardous duty, Christ. You send a bunch of Chinese police to go seize guns from folks in Kentucky. Undertakers will be working 3 shifts. But what you're telling people, Ray, is see that guy over there waiting for the bank's loan officer because his wife want to remodel the bathroom? The one wearing the suit a little more wrinkled than yours? The guy who just dropped his kids off at Little League and then ate lunch with his wife at Shoney's? Yeah, that's the one. He's an ATF field agent. Last week he inspected the inventory of a local gun store. Found a single shot, 22 with a 161 halves barrel. Looked at it close, saw it was a smoothbore, made for 22 shot loads, so he called his supervisor. 16 inches is the limit for rifles, but under 18 for smoothbores without the $200 registration is illegal possession of a sawed-off shotgun. Store owner and his employees are now in jail, trying to raise a $250,000 bond, charged with violating the National Firearms Act, conspiracy to violate federal firearms laws, and violating RICO. The entire contents of the store, as well as the building itself, have been seized under the new forfeiture laws. The agent's about to go to the bank's parking garage now. Pop him in the back of the head with A22 when he fiddles with his car keys, then walk away. Ray, no one is going to do that. History proves it. You are not going to get intelligent, thoughtful, level-headed leaders to declare violent war on people that live in their neighborhood and whose kids go to their kids' school. It's hard enough for most people to fight complete strangers when they invade their country. Frogs wouldn't do it in '42. Italians, Yugoslavians, Greeks, same deal. Hell, even the Czechs back in the 30s. They didn't do anything, and the Czechs had some of the best guns in the world, built at the ZB factory there. The Reichsprotector of Czechoslovakia rode around in an open car with only a driver for security, and all the driver had was a P-38 and a flap holster. Finally, after a few years of occupation, a handful of guys decided to pop Heydrich, and they blew up his car, blasted pieces of horsehide from the seats into him, and he eventually died from blood poisoning because they didn't have any penicillin. But guess what? Heydrich was a hero, and got a hero's funeral and a huge monument on his grave. Krautz had won the war, he'd be in the history books as a hero today. I'll grant you your points, Ray said. Let me get us a couple more sodas before we talk ourselves hoarse. He left for a few minutes and returned with 2 cans and a brown paper bag. Ray handed Henry his Coke and sat back down. My idea wouldn't work the way you described it. You're right about that. I'll also admit that it is much harder to initiate a war when your enemies look and talk just like you do. But you're forgetting one thing. This isn't Germany or France or Czechoslovakia. It's America. Americans are people who don't want government running their lives. That's why we're here. The colonists fought the finest army in the world for that reason. Immigrants came here and made this their home because of that philosophy. You're right that I wouldn't sign up after reading an anonymous call to arms, but I would sign up when I saw with my own 2 eyes that it was time, and I see that right now with what happened to you. You got the names, addresses, and a lot more, and I've got the resources. I want to fight these bastards, Henry, don't you? Ray, Henry said, as he watched his friend fiddle with the paper sack, I came here because I wanted your help. Ideas mostly, on making sure I stayed out of prison. The fact is, I'd like to keep blasting these guys, and I haven't completely made up my mind to quit just yet. Not when the first 22 went so well, he added. But you're in a lot different position, Henry went on. I got thrown into this, and I can't turn back the clock. I don't think you should voluntarily jump into something that can get you put away for life. Henry Bowman shifted his position in the overstuffed armchair. I'm not up on my Aspen land values, but my guess is your net worth is 15 or 20 million bucks. No, you're not up to date, Ray said. And that money from my settlement that I put in a mutual fund wrapped in an annuity, over 100 million now. You're kidding. No, that's just 14% a year, which piles up when you defer the taxes instead of having to lose principal every year. Well, that's my point. No matter what our government does, I can't see them nationalizing all your real estate, and your fund is still worth 60 million after the feds take 40%. Guy in your situation can insulate himself from Washington. Henry cocked an eyebrow as he continued. Might burn up most of your money by the time you die, but that's a damn sight better than having the feds confiscate it all under RICO and send you off to prison to have your asshole stretched by a bunch of lifers with AIDS. I know that, Henry. I also know that in the 18th century, the principals in the American Revolution didn't have AFDC and Social Security and unemployment and welfare to fall back on. If they lost their house and their land and their livelihood, they had nothing. The taxes the colonists paid in America were lower than the ones the Brits paid in England, but that didn't cut any ice. The colonists said enough. And when the time came to shoot those guys that looked the same and talked the same as they did, they shot them. What I want to do is modest compared to what the founders did. Every one of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence knew he might be signing his own death warrant, and many of them were captured, tortured, and killed. I'm not as brave as they were, but I will put my money where my mouth is. One of those brave men was a landowner who makes me look like a bit player. He owned more land than anyone else in the entire state of Virginia, and his property extended all the way to Ohio. I'm sure he could have cut a deal and kept all or most of what he had by siding with the king, but he didn't. George Washington could have relaxed on his estate, screwing his wife when she was in the mood and his slave girls when she wasn't, but instead he chose to risk death by starvation and exposure in the winter and fever in the summer, fighting in the woods alongside a bunch of his field hands. If you'd gone to law school, you might have learned that, Ray said with a grin. In Africa, I kept having to move from one country to another because the governments always ended up stealing the wealth their most productive residents created. I moved back here where that kind of shit doesn't happen, and as soon as I get to the airport, I discover that while I was gone, the federal government of the United States started modeling itself after Germany's brown shirts in the 30s. He held out the paper bag. So I'm in, pal. What's that? Henry made no move to take the sack. Went to one of my safes while I getting our sodas. This is a piece of our war chest. I appreciate it, but I've got about 40 G's with me. Then an extra $250,000 ought to help out quite a bit, Ray said with a smile as he threw the bag in his friend's lap. Jesus, Henry said as he peered inside. He looked up at his friend. You are serious. That's what I've been telling you. Got his wheels turning now, Ray said to himself. Your estimate of the land value here was short by about half, and I sold off a chunk of it last year and banked it offshore. Money's not a problem. You're the idea man. You still think it's impossible. Ooh, Henry said, exhaling. This is a whole new ballgame. Can't do it without getting a bunch of people to take the plunge, but what? But they don't have to be the first, Henry said slowly, then nodded his head. Ray remained silent and waited for him to explain what he meant. The kind of intelligent leaders we need are often motivated by two emotions, opposite sides of the same coin. You just showed that. Which two are those? Inspiration's the big one. You think about what the founders went through when they could have taken. The easy way out, it makes you want to be a better person. The other motivator is shame. Shame at how little you've done, always letting someone else cane you the water. We tap into those two sentiments. We might not need to ask for any help or give too many instructions. The people just might do all those things I said would be too hard for them. They won't do them based on just a verbal or written plea for action, but they just might be inspired by seeing someone else first. The two of us? Ray asked. Henry shook his head. Need more than just us. You and I can kick it off, but we'll need one other person. Shouldn't have to get more than that if you're serious about the bankroll. Henry stared into the distance, his eyes unfocused. Any ideas? I think he's already joined up. I wasn't counting on the use of a jet, Henry said as they broke through 20,000 feet. When did you get this thing? Last year. An old guy like me can't get laid in Aspen unless he has at least one private jet. Bought the little Citation since it only needs one pilot. You normally go places on the spur of the moment like this? Pilot won't think anything of it? Henry said softly in his friend's ear. Ray shook his head. Bill's an ex-drug pilot. Crashed in the Everglades and it cured him of his thirst for adventure, shall we say. Now he sells home furnishings in the off-season and flies for me when I want to go somewhere. He doesn't mind sitting around in motels or at the airport when we're on the ground. It gives him a chance to work on his proposal for a TV series. You're kidding. No, one of his friends in town hit it big that way and Bill's convinced he can do better. Maybe he can. Right. Anyway, to answer your original question, Bill thinks I'm going to look at some potential sites for strip shopping centers on a swap deal. You're along as a second set of eyes. I told him I've got friends in all 3 cities, and I could stay an hour or a couple days in each place depending on how things go. He's used to that. Ray saw his friend scowl faintly. What's the matter? I better pay attention to the approach speeds and bone up on the manual for this thing, Henry said. It probably won't be a problem this trip, but unless your boy Bill ignores all forms of news media, he'll figure it out before too long. Either that, Henry said with a big grin, or he'll start to think one of us is awfully bad luck. He saw Ray's look. What, you think I'd crunch it? Henry asked in mock indignation. Come on, fortune favors the bold. He stood, stooping in the low cabin, and moved up to the right-hand pilot's seat. God, I hope so, Ray Johnson thought as he stared at his friend's back.